Chapter 35. The Hunting Party. Jenni was looking out of her window at the colourful palace gardens again. How bright and lovely the garden looked at the moment. She watched for a minute as a bird flew quickly over the lawn, looking for any small tidbits that might have been left over from yesterday's lunch. It was beginning to get late in the year now. It would be her birthday in a little over 2 weeks, but Jenni was no longer focusing so much on her birthday as on the big wedding day that was now a little over a month away. There were times when she would curse herself for delaying the wedding for those extra 2 weeks. She knew she had done the right thing. It wouldn't be good for her to have her wedding and her birthday on the same day, and yet the closer she got to that wedding day, the further away it seemed to be. It sometimes felt as if the days themselves were conspiring to be longer and longer the later in the year it got. It seemed as if they were quietly slipping in a few extra hours each day, purely for her benefit. Jenni glanced around at her bed. It was early yet, and her breakfast things still lay on the side table, the remains of the yolk of her egg having long since set against the metal surface of the plate, and the tiny residue of orange still clearly visible at the bottom of the cup she had been given. Elsewhere in the room, a large jug of water had been placed on the floor at the foot of a small wooden table, on which was sitting a small tin basin. The water had been placed there so that Jenni could wash herself before the servants arrived. She would rather have taken a bath, but it seemed that despite the city being located on the coast, there was a shortage of usable water during the hot months of the year. It seemed that even the royal family had to make sacrifices. Jenni left her place by the window and checked that the door to her room was locked. She didn't want to be disturbed before she made use of the water. Then she stepped over to the basin and poured most of the water into it. The water was cold, but not freezing. Jenni had been used to much worse back at the castle. It took a few seconds for the water to settle down to an extent that Jenni felt she could use it. Even then, it continued to rotate slowly in a clockwise direction, as if being led by some external force. Feeling very nervous, Jenni performed another quick check of the room to ensure that she was alone, even though she already knew that there could be no one else in the room with her. If the king should ever hear about what she got up to each morning with her washing water, he might use it as an excuse to call off the wedding. And if he did that, then where would she be? Where would her father be? After all, Jenni muttered to herself in a voice that badly imitated the king's, as she traced a rough circle in the water with her index finger, magic is the purview of peasants. Scrying in this way wasn't quite as good as one of those little crystal ball things that Mangloss created for Sir Richmond's spies. She wouldn't be able to communicate with the subject of her search at all. They wouldn't even be aware that she was watching them. The pool wouldn't supply her with any sort of sound, so she couldn't listen to the subject's conversations. All she could really do was watch and see what they were doing, and maybe check that everything was right in the world with her loved ones. Occasionally she checked on her father. He had been given the run of the palace now, though he was always accompanied by a pair of palace guards wherever he went. She had often seen him going for long walks outside the palace grounds. Jenni's mother Breardine was usually with him. Jenni would usually cancel the spell if she saw her father at any of the city's markets. She didn't want to ruin the surprise of any wedding gift that he might be buying for her. Jenni's father had even become a regular at the dinner table now. No longer did he just have to sit in his room waiting to be fed. He was a welcome guest at the dinner table, as was Jenni's mother, and her father was usually treated like a guest, rather than the prisoner that he actually was. Sometimes Jenni would watch what her brother, Greyfulf, now the Duke of the Moth, was doing. More often than not he would be enacting some official business, or playing with his children. Greyfulf rarely seemed to be doing much of any real interest, but it was always good to see him just the same, and to know that he was alive and well. Then there was Tyr. Whenever she tuned into Tyr these days, he always seemed to be wearing his heavy plate mail armour and walking along one of the battlements of the castle, as if he was expecting trouble. Occasionally he would stop and chat with one of the guards. On one occasion she had seen a man in the livery of the king not too far from where Tyr passed. This told her that the king was maintaining a presence at the Moth Castle, and the only reason she could think of as to why he should do that was on the off chance that Race should ever try to return. Although not a member of her family, she also liked to check in on Anita occasionally. Jenni missed her best friend and sparring partner. She hadn't practiced a sword since her arrival in First Town. She hadn't even touched a sword. While her father had never been happy with her martial training, he had turned a blind eye. Somehow, Jenni was certain that the king would be a lot less accepting. Today it was race that she decided to concentrate on. She didn't try to look at what race was doing too often. It was usually a waste of time to even try. There was something covering the city of Golspon, like a magical barrier of some description. It prevented her from seeing anything at all of what was going on beyond that city's gates. She thought she'd been able to smash through that barrier once, only for her own spell to shatter. On that occasion, the water in the bowl had splashed violently into her face and over much of the floor and nearby wall. She sometimes wondered if a scrying ball would be powerful enough to cut through the interference. It was a moot point, as she didn't have one. She concentrated on her brother, Race. As she did so, she expected the result she usually got. The picture would begin to coalesce, and then would fade into nothing more than gentle rippling water. She had already decided that when this spell failed, she would go and see how Anita was doing. She hadn't looked in on Anita for nearly a month. The image of a harpy appeared in the water. It had to be Race. The harpy was wearing some sort of brown skirt that bore some elvish hieroglyphs. She couldn't quite make out what the markings said. He was flying. Trees were passing beneath him in the image at a fair rate of knots. He was covering the distance quite quickly. At first, Jenni doubted that it was her brother. She had forgotten that her harpy brother would look like a harpy now. She had half expected him to appear before her as she had known him when they were growing up. It was actually a bit of a shock to see Race in his full glory as a harpy. It had to be him, though. He carried both the sword and the bracelets that they had given to him the night he escaped the castle. Jenni suddenly began to feel greatly relaxed. Horse and tiger, it was good to see him again, even if he was no more than an image in a basin of water. She had been trying to see him for so long, wanting to see for herself that Race was alive and well. The last report she had had about her brother from Sir Richmond had arrived more than 4 months ago, and said simply that Race was joining an elven regiment called the Hope. Since then she hadn't heard a thing. All those attempts Jenni had made to look in on him during the past, all those failed spells to check up on her brother, suddenly felt as if they had all been well worth the effort. He had learnt to fly. She had heard that from one of Sir Richmond's reports, but it was good to see it for herself. Someone in the city of Golspon, a city filled with creatures of evil intent, had taken the time to teach her brother how to fly. Even as she thought about it, she saw the image of Race descend into the treetops. A moment later, there was a sudden halt to the feeling of movement, and a cloud of leaves scattered through the air nearby as her brother found a perch in the top third of one of the trees. A moment later, that same tree seemed to shake some more for no readily apparent reason. Race had someone with him. With a swift movement of her hand, Jenni altered her viewpoint on her brother slightly, forcing her point of view to move above him a little and then to the side where she thought another harpy had landed. There she was, a second harpy. At least Jenni assumed the harpy was female. With the birth rate geared at about 10 to 1 in favour of female children, and knowing the fate of what happened to most of the unwanted male children, Jenni felt the odds were in her favour on this one. She couldn't be sure, though. The harpy was wearing a brown skirt of the same description as Race's, and to a human at least, all harpies looked pretty much the same from the waist up. The only real difference, the wings, even looked similar through a bowl of slowly rotating water. Jenni wondered for a moment if this second harpy might be Race's girlfriend. True, Jenni didn't think she looked all that pretty, but then she was a harpy. To Race she might well be very attractive. Jenni remembered how Race hadn't even looked twice at some of what she thought of as the prettier girls in Moth Castle. She also remembered how Race had fallen for Agnart. True, it had only been a crush, but it had been clear then that Race would only ever truly fall in love with his own kind. Jenni adjusted her point of view a little more, trying to get a better look at this second harpy, while the spell itself remained centred on her brother. She noticed another wing and a tail from at least a third harpy in the tree just behind where Race had positioned himself. Jenni continued to adjust her point of view until the owner of that wing came into view. In all, there were 3 more harpies perching in the high branches of the trees next to Race. None of the harpies seemed to be looking at each other. Well, Maybe Race and the girl in the same tree exchanged a quick glance, but that was about it. They all seemed more intent on something that was happening on the floor of the forest. "He seems happy," Jenni said to herself, a tear in her eye. She had feared that she might lose her brother to the Harpies of Gulspond, that once he had learned to live amongst his own kind he would never want to return. Until she had seen for herself, Jenni had always thought that there was a chance he would one day return to her. Now she could see just how well he seemed to be fitting in. She was happy that he was happy, but somehow she doubted that she was ever going to see him in the flesh again. The image of Ray showed him preparing his bow. There was something strange about the bow to Jenni's eyes. It wasn't the same one he had left the castle with. It was of a subtly different colour. She watched her brother as he prepared an arrow. Whatever it was he planned to aim at, Jenni knew it wouldn't be long for this world, not while he was wearing those magical bracelets of his. Jenni was engrossed in the image, watching Race as he took careful aim at whatever his target was. Jenni knew he didn't really need to aim. He had to be doing that for effect, which suggested that perhaps he didn't really trust those he was with after all. At least, not with the knowledge that his bracelets were of a magical nature. Then there was a knock at the door. Jenni quickly destroyed the image in the wash basin and called out, "Who is it?" "We're here to be collecting your breakfast things and to be changing your bedclothes, Your Majesty," replied the voice. That wasn't Madgey's voice. The pattern of speaking was similar, and yet the colloquialisms sounded forced, and the voice itself was totally different. Jenni glanced back quickly to ensure that the image in the basin had fully dissipated. Then she walked over to the door and let the servants in. Every day since Jenni had moved into the castle, the servants had dressed the same way. Each of them wore long one-piece gowns that were both designed to keep their own clothes clean underneath, while having the added effect of making them look like they were all wearing the same uniform. They were also wearing thin white gloves and soft flat shoes, designed so that they wouldn't scuff the hardwood floors of the palace. There were 7 servants. One took the empty breakfast things and disappeared out the door almost immediately. 2 more started to make the bed, while the others just tidied up anything that needed tidying. One of them carried a broom and started to sweep, although Jenni would have said the floor wasn't dirty enough to warrant such attention. The leader of this small army of servants, who had always been Madgey in the past, wore a special apron that marked her as in charge. Today, that apron was being worn by someone that Jenni didn't recognise, although she seemed to be doing a good job of controlling the other servants while changing the bed linen. "Where's Madgey today?" Jenni asked of the servant with the apron. "Madgey, Your Majesty?" the servant asked. She didn't look up. The servants never did look at any of the royal family directly in the face. It simply wasn't done. And though Jenni wasn't yet a member of the royal family, she was already treated as if she was by the servants. "Madgey," Jenni confirmed. "Large woman, cheerful disposition. I've greeted her personally every single day." "I don't be knowing any Madgey, Your Majesty," the servant replied. "Maybe she got reassigned to another part of the palace." "Maybe," Jenni agreed with a sigh. "I wish I could be telling you more, Your Majesty," the servant commented, "but I've only just been assigned to these duties." Jenni nodded. "What's your name?" The servant stood up. She seemed to be looking nervously about her as if searching for moral support from one of the other servants. Her gloved left hand even slipped into one of the pockets of her gown. "My name, Your Majesty?" "Oh, yes," Jenni said. "If you're going to be replacing Madgey as my servant, it would be nice if I could greet you by name every morning." The servant seemed to visibly relax. "Of course, Your Majesty. My name is Sue." "Sue," Jenni repeated. "Yes, Your Majesty." She removed the hand from the pocket and finished making the bed. Jenni smiled comfortingly at the servant. She couldn't help noticing the slight bulge on the middle finger of Sue's right glove. Sue was clearly wearing some sort of ring. "Are you married, Sue?" "No, Your Majesty." Sue sounded a little confused by the question at first. Then she asked, "Are you looking forward to your wedding, Your Majesty?" "I am," Jenni admitted. "I also, Your Majesty," Sue declared, and there was a chorus of agreement from the other servants. To think that one day I'll be able to tell my children, if I ever have any that is, that I personally knew Queen Jenni. "Queen Jenni?" Jenni said, surprised. "I'll only be a princess." "Sorry, Your Majesty." Sue seemed a little stunned by the revelation. She scrambled for words quickly, as if trying to make amends for the faux pas. I mean nothing by it. It was just a slip of the tongue. Your husband is next in line to the throne, so one day you will be queen. I guess so, Jenni agreed. She spoke comfortingly, trying to make it clear that as far as Jenni was concerned, the servant's mistake would go no further than this room. Jenni then turned back to look out of the windows again. The prince was out on the lawn playing some sort of ball game that wasn't a million miles different from croquet. She loved him. Did she really love him enough to marry him? Yes, she did. She was sure she did. She didn't love him quite as she did her Harpy brother, but that was a different kind of love. Her brother was very special to her. She hoped he would live a happy life amongst his own kind. Well, Your Majesty, Sue declared shortly after breaking into Jenni's thoughts, we're finished for the day. Should I send the seamstresses in? Do so, Jenni agreed.